Today we're diving into the engine of life itself, the actual mechanisms of evolution. We're going to unpack exactly how Darwin's revolutionary idea finally connected with modern genetics. And by the end, you'll be able to see the key forces that are right now constantly shaping every living population on this planet.
You know, it's pretty amazing when you think about it. Darwin could see the brilliant outcome of evolution everywhere he looked. But the how traits were actually passed down from parent to offspring, that was a total black box to him. So how did we get from that giant question mark to the precise, powerful science of evolutionary biology we have today? Well, let's find out. The story of modern evolution is really about two world-changing ideas finally meeting. Darwin gave us the what, this idea of natural selection, but it took the entire field of genetics to give us the how. And when those two merged, they created what we now call the modern synthesis, and it completely changed biology forever. What's just wild when you look at this timeline is the gap. For more than 40 years, the two key pieces of the puzzle, Darwin's natural selection and Gregor Mendel's incredible work on heredity, they just existed in separate worlds. It wasn't until the 1900s that scientists finally put them together, and once they did, biology was never the same again.
And that fusion, that's the modern synthesis. And honestly, you can't overstate how important this was. It's what turned evolution from this brilliant but kind of abstract concept into something we can actually watch and measure. For the very first time, we could define evolution as a quantifiable change happening in populations right before our eyes.
So, to really think like a modern biologist, we have to make a huge mental shift. Individual organisms don't evolve. They live, they reproduce, they die. What actually evolves is the entire population, this whole collective group of interbreeding individuals. That's the unit of evolution.
And to measure the changes in that population, we have to zoom way in, down to its collective DNA. We track how traits are inherited through its genes. Or, to be even more specific, we track alleles. The easiest way to think about them is as different flavors of the same gene. So if hair color is the gene, then brown hair and black hair are the alleles. These different versions, they're the raw material for all the variation we see in the world.
And this right here, this brings us to the modern, measurable, crystal-clear definition of evolution. It is simply a change in allele frequencies in a population over generations. That's it. Look at this chart. As allele A becomes more common, this population is, by definition, evolving. It is that simple and that powerful.
Okay, so now that we know what evolution is, a change in allele frequencies, let's dive into the most famous mechanism that causes those frequencies to change: selection.
Natural selection is built on this really simple, elegant logic. It has 4 pillars. First, you have to have variation in a trait. Second, that variation has to be heritable. It can be passed down. Third, that difference has to affect who survives and has more kids. You put those 3 things together, and the 4th pillar is inevitable: adaptation, where the beneficial traits become more common over time.
Now, selection can push a population in a very specific direction. The classic example is the peppered moths in England. When pollution darkened the trees, the darker moths were better hidden from birds. So as you can see in the graph, the whole population's average color shifted toward that one darker extreme. We call this directional selection. But sometimes selection does the opposite. It weeds out the extremes and favors the average, the middle of the road. See how the curve gets narrower? A perfect example is the number of eggs a robin lays. 4 eggs is kind of the sweet spot. Too few, and you're not passing on as many genes. Too many, and the parents can't feed them all, so they might all starve. The intermediate trait is the most successful. That's stabilizing selection.
And then you have this really cool one, disruptive selection. This is when both extremes are favored, but the middle is selected against. Imagine rabbits in a place with dark rocks and white sandy patches. The dark rabbits and the light rabbits can hide, but any grayish-brown rabbit in the middle, it sticks out like a sore thumb everywhere. This can actually split a population in 2, and could even be the first step in creating a whole new species.
But here's the thing. Evolution isn't just about survival. Darwin himself knew there was another, equally powerful force at work, and he called it sexual selection. This isn't a struggle just to exist, it's a struggle for mates. This is what leads to sexual dimorphism, those really obvious differences between males and females. And it usually happens in one of 2 ways. You have intersexual selection, which is all about mate choice. Think a peacock showing off its elaborate tail to a peahen. And then you have intrasexual selection, which is about direct competition, like these deer locking antlers to win access to females. So let's pause and think about that for a second. That giant, beautiful peacock's tail, it's a massive advantage for attracting a partner, but it's also a huge liability. It's like a giant eat me sign for a predator. This really highlights the constant trade-offs that are at the heart of how evolution works.
Okay, so selection acts like a filter, right? It works on the variation that's already there. But that begs a really important question. Where does all this variation come from in the first place?
And the answer is mutation. These are just random changes in the DNA sequence. And you have to understand this. Mutation is the only ultimate source of all new alleles. Without it, you get no new traits. Evolution would just grind to a halt because selection would have nothing new to select from.
Now, it's really easy to think that every single evolutionary change is adaptive, that it's all for a reason, but that's a huge misconception. Sometimes allele frequencies change not because of selection, but just because of pure random chance.
We call this genetic drift. Imagine a small group of beetles, and just by dumb luck, a few green ones get stepped on. The green allele becomes rarer, not because it was bad, just because of a random event. This is always happening, but its effect is way more powerful in small populations.
We see drift happen in two classic scenarios. The bottleneck effect is when a disaster, like a fire or a flood, randomly wipes out most of a population. The few survivors are an unrepresentative sample of what was there before. Then there's the founder effect. That's when a small group breaks off or founds a new isolated population, and they only bring a small fraction of the original genetic diversity with them.
And our last mechanism is gene flow. This is pretty straightforward. It's just the movement of alleles between populations when individuals migrate. You can think of it like a genetic mixing process. It tends to make different populations more genetically similar to each other over time.
So let's put it all together now. We've got mutation, which creates brand new variation. We have selection, both natural and sexual, which filters that variation. And then we have the random chance events of genetic drift and the mixing from gene flow. The key thing to remember is that these forces don't work in isolation. They are all constantly interacting with each other.
So a good way to think of evolution's engine is like this. Mutation is the creative force, just randomly generating new genetic ideas. Selection is the editor, favoring the ideas that work best in a particular place and time. But all the while, genetic drift is like a random lottery, changing frequencies by pure chance, and gene flow is connecting different populations, sharing those ideas around. It's this complex, constant dance between creativity, editing, and pure chance that has generated every bit of the incredible diversity of life on Earth.